Good morning. Hello. Welcome back to another edition of Curtis Jones Writing. I'm reading the last chapter out of the first book of the trilogy of Love Endures All Things. I've written 14 books. I have finished reading, and you'll find them behind this video in the list of stuff I've done. Dad's Old Truck 1, Dad's Old Truck 2, Imagination, and now the fourth book is Love Endures All Things. And if you remember the last time we spoke, I read, I told you that the next one would be the chapter written by my wife when we were in college, and we were at college when the last story that I read. So this is chapter 13, and this is My Journal is the title of it, by Stephanie G. Jones, written by Stephanie for English class 1113, 1113 at Rogers State College, April 1st, 1984, long time ago. And I didn't know anything about this one until after she passed in 2015. And I was doing some cleanup in 2016 and found this written by Stephanie, My Journal, for her English class. And I wanted to read that at this time in my life story because this is when she wrote it. By this time, this journal, or I'm sorry, by the time this journal is finished, I will have passed my 31st birthday. Living this far is an achievement by itself. I have filled it with a wonderful husband of 16 years and four great children. Ha ha, you may say, for I did marry when I was 14 and haven't regretted it at all. That still makes me tear up when I think of her saying that, because that's how I felt. Let me go on. The only thing that I did feel bad about was not finishing my education. I had wild ambitions to be an archaeologist, go to Egypt, and become immersed in their history. I always had an interest in mummies, hieroglyphics, pyramids, and ancient pharaohs. Maybe I'll never see any of those things, but I can read about them. I could read when I was 4 years old, and it has led to one of my greatest joys in my life, and it gave me a passion to learn. I started to get serious about reading 4 years ago when we have a small library of our own, and I decided to make use of it. When I went through them, I chose Winds of War by Herman Wouk. It took me almost a month to read. It was over 800 pages. The conclusion of the book was such a disappointment. I called it a long, a lousy ending. I'm sorry. That, but I persevered and selected another big book. This time it was Maureen McCullough's The Thornbirds. And I really did enjoy it immediately, very immensely. I may be little, a little biased, but I have never enjoyed a book or novel written by a man. I think that they seem to take a more critical view of society than their female counterparts. I have read other books, and that led me up to now. I try to read at least a little every evening. After the literary works I had read, I decided that I would do just as well as some of those works and maybe better than others. I began to write my own stories, and by the time I had finished 3 stories, I knew that I liked it. I was not ready to send them off to a publisher because I was unsure of my use of the English language. I was sure I could write, but I didn't have the skills I thought I needed. I continued to do the research I needed to write a novel, but for the most part, it was on hold. I knew I would be able to do it later. It was at this time I decided to go back to school and finish my education. I knew that the tools I needed were there. My husband was attending Rogers State College, working toward a degree in electronic engineering, and he tried repeatedly to get me to enroll. The drive to write and the request of my husband made me take a serious look at the benefits to my own dreams. I finally committed to my instincts, and I did it for myself because this education was for me and for my dreams. Once I decided to do it, I became determined to finish it. It didn't matter if I had anything published or not. I could say, so what? I wasn't looking for the top 10 lists or the New York bestsellers list. I was doing this for me. I may say, stay hunched over a desk or table in writing to my dying days, but I will go into that long night fulfilled. I have enough Irish blood in my veins to be as stubborn as they come. I have no doubts whether I could do this or not. I can. All I really need is a starting place, and I am getting that now. I'll succeed despite the raised brows and knowing smiles. I know I've got the talent and the ability hidden deep down. I will be doing it even if the grandkids interrupt me when that time comes. My mother is one of those people who does not talk much about her youth or even tell anything about her early years in the States. That had led to a lot of speculation between my sisters and myself, my sister and myself. What little I do know, I'm, I'll really relay to you now. My grandmother, Eleanor Dawes, was the only child in an upper class family just northeast of London, England. The family owned and operated a coal mine in the nearby countryside. She was a child who was given much freedom and so became involved with a mere middle class boy from a large family. His name was George Barbrook, the oldest son of the family. George and Eleanor were married after a reasonable courtship. They were still subject to the upper class rules of etiquette. George was one of 24 children. His mother had 6 sets of twins, although George did not have a twin. How in the world she survived and raised that many children is beyond me. I would not live through such a collection of dependents. I'm just thankful she didn't pass those genes on through to me. George and Eleanor were married in 1927, and within a few months, my mother was on the way. They lived in a small town called Hertfordshire, and my grandmother still lived there when Stephanie wrote this. The story came down that my great grandfather fought in World War I, and I have two of the postcards he sent home to his mother in 1907. He made it through the war and the flu epidemic, and so goes my family tree. My grandfather, George, fought in World War II and was also stationed for some time in India. During that time, he became fluent in the native tongue, native language. One of the battles he was involved with was Dunkirk, where he was injured. He wouldn't talk about the nature of his injury or how he received it. I guess that is where my mother learned to be mysterious, learned her mysterious ways. After my mother, Eleanor, produced four children, two daughters, Patricia and Shirley, including two sons, Trevor and Howard. I never learned whether she had any other children after that. Mom's discretion at work, you know. What my mother has told us about the war in England and the bombing in London, she said that sometimes she and her friends would go to the movie house when the bomb warnings sounded, and there they stayed while the bombings went on around them. My mother was in her mid teens by that time. The teenagers were noted for their intellect. I'm sorry, and teenagers are noted for their intellect. I think I would have ducked into ducked and covered myself. Mom explained very little about the time between then and her life with my father in San Francisco, and so the mystery remains. My father's name is Michael Minzak, and his family was immigrants from Czechoslovakia who had settled in New York. Mike was the youngest of seven children. When his mother died, Mike's father remarried a widow who also had seven children. I think that living in a house with 14 kids may have been the reason my father acted in so many strange ways. He didn't know how to express his affection, and his marriage to mom was short lived. My sister and me often said that was what made him crazy. On the other hand, he was a brilliant pianist. Anyone who has heard his playing could tell you that. He did have three annoying habits of locking mom and me and my sister in a room while he played. It didn't take mom long to realize she couldn't live like this, and so she left him. Although I'm sure that there were other reasons involved in the departure, but but the results to my sister Liz and me were a broken family. After this, Liz and I spent years in foster family care system. Oh, mom and sometimes dad visited us from time to time, but never together. It was a very hard time for us. Liz would cry, and sometimes I would watch the foster parents put Liz in her high chair and place her in the closet to muffle the crying. It broke my heart to watch that. I know I could not help. Mom did eventually marry a man and secure our release from the foster care system, but I think that the damage had already been done to my sister and maybe me too. Since then, Mom had been married to at least a dozen men and some as short a time as 12 hours. Other marriages lasted for a week or maybe a year before they ended. The reason for this behavior was a mystery as well. I speculate that it must have something to do with her ability to stay in the United States. She never became a citizen and was always concerned about her green card. I'll probably never know the reason for what she did. After mom and dad divorced, dad married an opera singer from Germany, and they have been together for about 20 years. They lived in Pacifica, California, and when on a few occasions I would visit them, they would be gathered around his baby grand piano. Dad would write and compose music, and his little German wife would sing along with him. I think that may have been what he wanted from mom and me all those years ago. My grandfather in England died in 1978 from cancer of the spine. Mom was unable to go to the funeral and never really got over that, for she loved him so. My grandmother became footloose and fancy free after that. Mom never talked much about her mother anyway. But after her family died, she never spoke of her again. I don't even know if she is alive today. My Aunt Shirley married and had two children, and my Aunt Patricia also married and had two children. Her husband was one of the bricklayers for the Queen of England. My Uncle Trevor is a plumber, and Uncle Howard is a heat and air conditioning contractor. Uncle Howard specializes in placing central units in the old castles that abound in the countryside over there. On one occasion, when he pulled up the raised wooden floor and found a large stash of rare Tudor coins. Another occasion, he found a wooden packing crate, and when he got it home and opened it, to his surprise, it had an original Hallmark bowl. The next time Mom visited there, he gave it to her. This bowl now sits on Mom's TV and is full of dried grasses for decoration. It doesn't look its age and out of seems of little value. It looks a lot like some of the bowls that are made in Mexico you see at the flea markets today. Liz and I have had lots of fun trying to guess Mom's hidden past. One of Mom's claims is that she came to America with a aunt, but Mom is the only one from her family in America. She had been very elusive about it, and that makes it so much more mysterious. This year, Mom's New Year's resolution was to be married by the end of this year. Liz and I hope that this time it will work out because how many more men are there? Is the question we ask each other. Liz, if I haven't mentioned it before, is my youngest sister. She uh, was christened Elizabeth Mary Minzak after our father's favorite sister. I affectionately call her Lizard. And when we were young, I enhanced that nickname with rhyming descriptive words to show my position in the family. Liz has now reached the ripe old age of 26 and calls me her old straight-laced sister. She stands at 5'11" and enjoys wearing high heels to be able to look down on us smaller people. Her choice in clothing is beyond description. I will say she can wear a coin headband and look as though it were made for her. She just has one of those kinds of personalities. She is currently tutoring touring in Hawaiian Islands with her friend. She has sent postcards showing the beauty of the place. She has visited, she hopes to visit Czechoslovakia and see if she can find some of our long lost relatives. Nothing in our house interests visiting children more than my aquarium. They can stand for hours on end staring into the depth of just 10 gallons of water with all its countless colorful fish. Not only does it have a calming effect on your nervous system, but it also helps lower high blood pressure. I have owned one of these simple forms of entertainment for almost 10 years now. However, do you have any idea how hard it is to get rid of snails when one becomes infested? The snails may be thought of as a lowly creature, but it is a crafty little pest when it comes to the aquarium. They are seldom seen in the light of day, but when the lights go out, they begin their nightly forage of the green algae covered walls, rocks, shells, and anything else that sits still long enough for algae to grow and cover it. The minute the light comes on, the little beasts swiftly crawl and sink and bury themselves in the 10 pounds of gravel that cover the bottom of the tank. I originally obtained those unwanted inhabitants through my sister-in-law. There's there's there is a custom in my husband's family when one of us purchase or make something, we must all acquire the same thing so that the entire family follows suit. When I started my tank up, again, my sister-in-law I'm sorry, again, my mother-in-law, Jean, started her also. When we had babies, we would trade fish and end up with a very similar tank. Peggy, my sister-in-law, had three small children, and they would press their little noses against the tank in either of our houses. And due to their uh, enchantment with the tanks, Peggy brought her bought her own tank and stand, and we now had three trading partners. On visiting a neighbor who had a tank, Peggy came home with a plastic bag filled with small reddish brown snails. She was told that they would help keep the tank clean. Though, though by this time we were tired of cleaning them, she halved these tireless creatures with her mom, Jean, and shortly after this, we decided to move to Claremore, and Jean suggested I take some to help keep my tank clean. She said that there is nothing better to keep a tank clean. After some consideration, I picked up a couple for myself. Jean didn't think I had taken enough to do the job, so she dropped in about a dozen or so. I didn't know that they were so prolific, and in short order, I had tenfold in small snail populations. Sorry, in snail populations. I don't know how Jean and Peggy dealt with their snails, but I had a time of it. The snails were a problem. At first, I took the direct approach and laboriously picked out each and every one I found one by one. But digging around elbow deep in water and flushing them down the sink proved fruitless in controlling the pest. I then began to vent my anger upon them by smashing them against the glass every time I could see one. My kids and my husband helped me in this endeavor. I needed luck to even find one of these unprotected victims. The upside to this approach is that the fish began to watch us with anticipation and devour the helpless victims with vigor. After 6 months of this constant battle, I became desperate for a lasting solution. I decided that once and for all, I was going to rid myself of these tiny but persistent pests that had won so many battles, but not the war. The war was going to move to a new and unexpected level. I will win. As time went on, I had tried various methods and thought I had succeeded only to find reappearance of 2 or 3 weeks later. It was time to turn the world upside down. So early one morning, I began to assault, and hopefully for the last time. The first thing I did was to remove all the fish from the tank and put them in a safe place, a large bowl on the counter. In the bowl, I ended up with 25 grown guppies, one angelfish, one swordfish, an albino catfish, along with 30 or so baby guppies. The bowl seemed to be full of fish by this time. The next thing I did was to remove the filter that was below the gravel and place it into some bleach water in a bucket. I poured the gravel in the sink and dumped scalding hot water over it. This I did 2 or 3 times. The tank was scrubbed out with salt and a little water to aid the scrubbing. After a good rinse, it was left in the summer sun, to dry. I returned to the gravel and treated it with a bath of phosphoric acid for a 20-minute soak. I then rinsed the gravel several times for safety and laid the whole 10 pounds out in the sun to dry. I turned my attention on the filter then. To my surprise, the filter contained more eggs than all the other cleaning I had done. It seemed that my hardy invaders were hermaphrodites, and that was the reason all my attempts to rid to be rid of them had failed and was in fact a waste of time. The They propagate faster than rabbits. My advice is don't wait that long to fix a problem like this. I don't know how many eggs were in each nest or how long it takes them to hatch, but I do think that hadn't addressed the problem that I do think that I hadn't addressed the problem, I might have ended with enough snails to feed the whole of France. In my struggle, I had found nothing that had been creative, inventive, or made that would eat this annoying pest. The filter had received the same treatment. The long list of paraphernalia that lined my back porch now. After I cleaned up the mess in the kitchen and packed up the swordfish I had inadvertently stepped on, or picked up the swordfish I had inadvertently stepped on, I stopped to have a well deserved rest with my feet propped up and glad of it. Still not convinced that I had ex- executed the entire collection of pests by means of chemicals and heat and sun treatment, and had truly convinced that those things had truly succeeded. I gathered the gravel and headed back to the kitchen, and as I walked, the idea of frying the beasts left in the gravel came to me. Where I came from, I cannot say. Where it came from, I cannot say. I think it must have been pure inspiration. I took a cookie sheet and loaded a layer of gravel on it and put it under the broiler for 10 minutes until I had cooked the whole 10 pounds. After the sixth sheet of hot rocks, the house began to smell of sulfur. Each sheet then went into a sink of cold water. Maybe the shock would destroy whatever may have survived. Feeling proud of myself, I began to reassemble everything into the tank. After I got the filter system and gravel in place, I carried the tank back to its prominent place in our living room. Then came the process of carrying the water, 20 pitchers of water, without spilling any, from the kitchen sink to the middle of the living room. 5 hours I began to war. I began to war on these snails and the mess it created. I was ready to place the fish back into their home once again. The tank was now sanitized, presumably clean of the once welcomed workers. I carried the bowl of fish into the living room and poured the entire collection into the aquarium, now so clean and clear, in one motion. I was simply too tired and disgusted with the work to shuttle the fish a few at a time. Once the fish hit the water, I looked into the perfect environment, and the fish did not react as I had expected. Warning, warning, do not place a cold bowl of fish into a tank full of 95-degree water. It will be a shock to their systems. I thought about that warning after all the fish began to swim funny, and I could have given myself a good kick for remembering the warning when it was too late. The sight of the tank full of fish trying to jump out or swimming in erratic circles and going around upside down was funny at first view, and I laughed for some time before I realized my mistake. I thought at first they were very happy about being home again. Now it was back to the bowls if they were to survive. They were somewhat scalded and were back where they had begun the day, a little worse for the wear, but still alive. There they sat until the tank came to temperature that would be safe for their return. The endeavor cost the living of the angelfish and the swordfish and a number of baby guppies. The albino catfish was still a little on the yellow side, but it was able to pull through. It never got its white color back, though. It has been 2 months since the catastrophe I caused, and apart from the algae, there had been no reoccurrences of snails until yesterday. One lone red snail was blatantly making its way across the gravel and seemingly to mock me as the true winner. Because of this, I have been seriously considering trading my fish tank for a pair of finches. I have learned not to trust what looks easy from the outside because of the hidden difficulties. The children have the children I have each has different the children I have are each as different from each other as you can imagine. Michael is the oldest of my four children and the first grandchild on my husband's side of the family as well as my side. He is the first great grandchild on my side. Mike was born in Modesto, California on May 22nd, 1968, to a mother and a father old enough to be his brothers and sisters. Sometimes I wonder why I didn't wait until I was older, but now I'm glad they were all born early in my marriage. Mike is at the ripe old age of 15 and a half, and sometimes I wonder if he will ever survive the transition from boyhood to young manhood. One moment he's playing with a little toy car, and the next he's asking for his own motorized vehicle. Trading and bartering is now the thing he has discovered. If he can fix something for what he wants, he will, even if the thing he trades for is unusable. He'll fix it. Our garage is full of bicycle wheels, tires, handlebars, and other paraphernalia he had managed to accumulate over months. Upon rising in the morning, he turns on his small but motorized, uh, monstrously monstrosity, I'm sorry, of a radio with two speakers blasting and blaring as he proceeds to get himself ready for school. I am thankful that the machine he turned off during the day, it allows it always comes alive the minute he steps into the house and returns to remains so until we scream from our bed that it's time to go to sleep. At almost 6 feet tall, he seems to never be able to wear anything out from his growing so fast, but he's always complaining because he wants a $30 pair of jeans. He can own he can, on the other hand, wear out a pair of shoes within a week. How does he do that? I'll never know. His high school is offering an auto mechanics course, which is 3 hours long every day. He loves to tinker with motors and is great help to my husband. But what about his other classes? He chooses classes like math that he's already been in, taking him talking to him about his this doesn't seem to help, so we just sit back and hope for the best, believing that everything will turn out all right. Brian is my second child, and next to next in the Jones line, he is what I'd call an enigma. In all his 14 years plus, he still hasn't been able to figure we still haven't been able to figure him out. He's as big a mystery as a boy as men are when they are grown. Born in Modesto, California, also on December 30th, 1969, he is one of those unlucky children born so close to Christmas that the birthday party seems to be a letdown. Most of the resources had been dedicated to the big holiday already. Uh, Brian's birthday can be difficult when pockets are tapped out. I suppose he is most like me of all the kids. Curtis, my husband, says that Brian speaks just like I used to when we met. That is to say, in one continuous tone, monotone. He always has what is commonly known as the British Reserve. He is quiet, watchful, and slow to anger, and immediately patient with small children, infinitely patient with small children. But when his temper raises, you'd better watch it, for he'll explode at the slightest provocation. His joy for the moment are eating and watching television. He is not mechanical, and fixing a bike is beyond his comprehension. We used to have to tell him step by step instructions on everything. A simple request could be met with a confounded expression until we explained to him exactly what was to be done. Civics is his favorite class in school. In that course, he does extremely well. Art is another course he chose to go into with the suggestion by his older brother that it was very easy. He is having difficulty with it despite his brother's suggestion. He believes he would like to become a marine biologist or an oceanographer. Why? I don't know. And he hasn't enlisted us yet, or hasn't enlightened us yet. We will do as we always do, sit back and wait patiently until he does. Michelle is the only daughter and third in the Jones line. She is one of the few people in the world to be born on Leap Day, February 29th, 1972. She was born in Stillwell, Oklahoma. Besides being the only girl in the family of boys, she is the only left handed person and the only one of us with brown eyes. 24 hours after her arrival into this world, she was rushed to St. Francis Hospital in Tulsa, Oklahoma for emergency surgery. The doctors that delivered her explained as best he could that he thought there was something wrong with her tongue, some kind of defect. It seemed that she could not swallow, and it was beyond his knowledge exactly what the problem was. They kept a nurse in attendance around the clock because it was touch and go. She would, on occasion, stop breathing during that first day. I could not be permitted to have my baby with me, even for a few moments. They persuaded me to go home and not wait in the hospital room for whatever the news may be. Though I was unwilling to leave, I was finally sent home alone without my newborn. I finally could see that to leave my newborn in the hands of people who hopefully knew more than these doctors would be our best hope. She was taken by life flight to Tulsa that very day. The next morning, the state police arrived at our door to explain that surgery couldn't be performed until all the legal documents were signed so my husband and mother in law could call the hospital 150 miles and gave permission over the phone to be signed as soon as they could get there. They raced to Tulsa within an hour. I was unable to travel at that time, so I spent the next several hours being babysitted by my sister-in-law, who in her own way tried to keep us both away from the emotional breakdown. That had to be the longest emotional days of my entire life. When the news finally came, it was not favorable for her either. It was life or death, and they were preparing us for the latter. Michelle had pneumonia in both lungs. She had to be resuscitated twice, and with all that while all that was being done, she had only a 10% chance of survival. We were always religious, but we prayed as we had never prayed before over the next 3 days. The problem that became evident at birth was that her esophagus had grown wrong and the top half was capped before it reached the bottom half, and the bottom half was also capped off and was not connected to the top. So she could not get food into her little stomach. She was starving to death. When she did eat, the food was sent to her lungs by the breathing tubes that connected to the esophagus. The very complex surgery took 6 hours, and the probability of success was so small because she had grown enough in the time since birth that the two tubes might be too short to be connected. After the effects were after the effects were not pretty, or the after effects were not pretty. A 6 pound human with dozens of tubes and wires connected just to keep her alive. She was in a small glass incubator with rubber gloves through the sides so that she never felt human contact. She had shoulder length hair, dark brown hair that had been shaved off. Curtis did his best not to cry every time they were able to see her. We prayed that God could have her if he so needed her, but we wanted her back so our hearts would not break. It took 3 weeks before I was able to hold my newborn to my breast and love her as I had done with my sons. The overwhelming joy brought warmth back to my heart. I had made ready to lose her, and the peace that entered me at that moment gave me back the ability to breathe again. During the during the 3 weeks we were in limbo, waiting and hoping and praying. We made daily calls to the hospital and doctors and nursing staff. We were only able to go that far once a week, and I only went once for the pain from seeing my baby that way. The whole family waited for the news with as much anticipation as we had. The progress seemed so little, but there was always some good news intermixed. St. Francis Hospital is an imposing building, and I imagine it could house all the people in Stillwell, Oklahoma, and still have beds to spare. When I went there the first time, after about a month, the sight of this grand, pink, monstrous size structure that could be seen from miles away greeted me. Inside was a maze of halls and that stretched as far as the eye could see, with nurses scattering ever very quietly from room to room, scuttering from room to room, I'm sorry. When we finally reached our destination, we were instructed to put on gowns and white smocks and scrubs and sanitize our hands for 15 minutes before we could go into the room where we could see all the sick and severely ill babies. By that time, Michelle's hair had grown back a little, but it was still thin, and there was there was still a rubber tube embedded into her stomach. The doctor was not sure whether she should whether he should remove it when she came home, which he finally did. We were both so proud of our daughter that day when she finally came home. We were at least sure that everything was going to be fine once again. 12 years have now passed, and Michelle is still thriving, minus the tube snatched stitched to her stomach, thank God. She is exactly like every other girl her age, and she despairs of never reaching the 6 foot height of her Aunt Liz. Michelle is a strong supporter of equal rights movement, whether she knows it or not. Anything the boys will do, she will do as well. And she goes to great pains to prove she can. So she is always coming up with scrapes and bruises and cuts and many other injuries to her person. She is the only child that broke a bone. All these injuries inevitably happen just before we have a family portrait taken. She is one of the luckiest few that will be able to say she is younger than she really is. We always make a big deal about her birthday because it is so unique. I can almost imagine when she becomes an old gray haired woman what it may be like sitting in a big, well padded chair surrounded by grandchildren I'll never know. and one asking her, "How old are you, Grandma?" And she will be able to honestly answer, "Why, I'm 21 years old." Her answer will be bold because all truth always is. Curtis Stephan is the last of the Jones line. He is fondly called Spooks due to his arrival on Halloween night, and since there is about 18 grandchildren in all, his grandmother often refers to him as Little Boy. Confused by all the grandsons' names, I personally hope she calls him that because there are 12 grandsons. Although it shouldn't be too hard to remember his name because she named her own son Curtis. We named our son Little Curtis after us both. He definitely would be the last child we would have. Curtis is like a small, energetic whirlwind. He is constantly doing one thing or another, whether it is good or bad. He gets up early in the morning to watch television, wash clothes, or work on a variety of disassembled bicycles littering the garage. He takes after his older brother in being able to fix anything that has become unfunctional. He also has a quick, flashing temper of the next brother and whines like his older sister. All in all, he is a mixture of all three of his older siblings, and he is just trying to be himself. He being the baby, even though he's past his 10th birthday, we have all, and I stress all, have tried to spoil him. He is presently in the Webelos, a form of Scouts, and enjoys it. The Cub Scouts annual Pine Car Derby was just a few months ago, and his father and son spent hours upon hours designing, cutting, and sanding, painting, and assembling what was a square piece of wood of 2x4. The long hours paid off with a third place trophy, the red ribbon, and a picture in the newspaper. When then came the blue and the gold banquet, where he was awarded the Bobcat patch. It wasn't so bad, but the three of us, Curtis's father, Curtis' son, and myself, had to get up in front of the cafeteria full of people. We had to turn our son upside down and pin the badge on his pocket. Our lives are now a continuous stream of going from one place to another, and I just pray that the kids don't run us ragged. I only know about myself, my family, my children, and in looking at it one day at a time, I will tell how it came about. I became married and some of the crazy things we've done. It may cause you to wonder how we survived it all. In 1966, I had met a boy who had enlisted in the Army. We went on various dates before he started serving his time at Fort Ord, California. Whenever he had leave, he would literally drop by and expect me to be able to go in somewhere. It was on one such leave that he brought a couple of his friends with him, and expected me to find dates for them. It was during a weekday night, and most of my friends' parents wouldn't allow their daughters out on a school night. He wanted me to fix them both up with a date. Well, there's no need to say I was unsuccessful in Turlock, where I lived. I had friends in Modesto, so I tried there next. So I wasn't too concerned yet. What I did, what I didn't know at the time, was that the boy was anticipating a date for both his friends with whomever I could get to go with us. As the evening progressed, the more upset he became, and I was learning just what kind of person he was. It came to the point as we went from house to house that I sat on the further side of the car and him on the other side. His two friends, buddies, his two buddies, were in the front seat. Needless to say, Curtis used this opportunity to his advantage by jumping over the seat and engaging me in conversation. That is when the courtship began between me and my now husband, Curtis. We had gone on various dates with my younger sister in tow. Either it was that my mother didn't trust me or that she enjoyed herself with an evening out with the girls. That's the last chapter of Love Endures All Things. I'm sorry it brought me to tears a time or two, but I lived through those things, so I kind of remember them. And I never really thought about how it affected Stephanie until I got to read her journal. And that's why it had to be included in this book. God bless you. If you want to get these books, you could go to my Amazon site. You could go to this web page. That is my book web page, curtis-jones-books.squarespace.com, and there's links that'll take you there. I also did seminars before the COVID came, and they have a copy at the Montgomery Library that's linked to both these sites. Or you could go to the Facebook page, Curtis Jones Author page on Facebook, and you could get a link to Amazon or to the library on that one. God bless you and take care of you. Next time I read, I'll be reading Love Endures All Things Across the Creek. This tells about the next 15 years of me and Stephanie's marriage. This is the first, 15 years. And this is the last 17 years or so that we were married. And so I'll be working my way through them. And I'm going to post every chapter of every book I've written. If you like this, tell your friends about it. Send them a link so they can follow it too. God bless you and have a good evening.